Thank you for joining us today for another exclusive interview. I'm your host today, Aurelian Demia. Today, we welcome back Dr. John Kohnke, renowned equine nutritionist, as we spotlight one of the most challenging threats to racehorses in the Gulf, laminitis. With synthetic tracks, high starch diets, and extreme heat in the GCC, how can trainers spot early warning signs, support hoof recovery, and safely return horses to peak performance? Dr. John Kohnke shares essential nutritional strategies, effective prevention protocols, and timelines for getting your horses back on track. Don't miss these expert insights into managing and preventing laminitis when every day counts for your champion. Well, John, great to have you back.
Thank you very much.
So, what are the early warning signs of laminitis that trainers in the GCC often miss before it becomes career threatening?
Well, one of the earliest signs, and you mentioned about high grain diets, is probably one of the most common reasons for low grade laminitis in horses in training, because people start it too quickly, grain up too quickly when they bring them into work. If they've been into work before somewhere over in some other country and they come to the GCC for the actual race period, when they come into training for the season, well, it's not quite as bad. But if you suddenly bring a horse from a pastured paddock into grain-based feeds, that can be a real problem if you start them too quickly. So the main common thing we see is what we call sore feet syndrome. It's a phrase that describes a proppy gait, shifting from one foot to the other all the time. The horse is standing there, he's going from one foot to the other every couple of minutes and trying to shift weight and comfortable, particularly in the front legs, because the front feet have got more weight on them. Front legs got more weight than the back legs. They might rest one back legs, but they don't rest one front leg very often, but they do change weight, shift their weight from one to the other a lot if they've got sore feet. And the problem with thoroughbreds, they've got thin walls and thin soles in many cases. It's a genetic problem in many breeds, many bloodlines of thoroughbreds. So they tend to have an inherent risk of getting low-grade laminitis because they've got very thin soles, and concussion, everything adds to it. The other thing is inflammation of the hooves. So get a shortened stride, a proppy gait, what we call a proppy gait on the front limbs. They're very shuffly in their gait, shortened stride. And you may not see, usually when you start getting them up to high speed and race speed, they start to really shorten up the stride. But that's a dangerous thing, because when you got up to race speed, you've got a little more pressure, up to 5,000 kilos of weight on their feet, and the front leg at the pivot point in the height when the leg's upright. And that can cause a lot of tearing of the internal laminae, which are the things that actually get inflamed. And that's what laminitis comes from, the inflammation of the lamellae inside the feet. So basically is, another thing I see a lot, and I used to see it a lot in Randwick and in Sydney and other race stables I work with, is that people grain them up too quickly. We'll talk about that later in the talk today. But they get, not only do they get sort of shuffly gaits and shifting weight and what we call sore feet syndrome. That was first republished. Sore feet syndrome was a name coined by a guy called Linford and his colleagues in 1986, where they found that 46% of racehorses, 46%, would you believe, of racehorses in early training in the first 4 to 6 weeks have low-grade laminitis because of too much grain too quickly. So that's one of them, okay? Plus the addition of concussive on tracks and all that sort of thing, and the inherent thin soles, they've got a problem. So the other thing I see, is to go to Randwick a lot, we see growth rings on the hooves coming down from the coronary band. Now, it takes about 4 weeks to get a band down. It's an increased growth rate because the blood's being diverted from the sole area of the hoof, inside the hoof, into the coronary band. It's what's called bypasses and shunts and goes into the coronary band, and that increases the nutrients to the coronary band. So there's a growth ring comes down. The hooves actually grow more quickly there, and you can see a ring. If the horse has got too much blood and got a growth ring, you'll see a raised elevated ring around the hoof. If the horse is very ill and is really sick, you'll see a depression under the coronary band. The hoof's not growing as quickly, so there's actually a depression, a little depressed area, like a groove going around, a wide groove going around the coronary band just below. And that takes about 4 weeks to start to grow again. You quite often see that. Also, if it's high grain, you see a lot of diarrhea, smelly diarrhea and that sort of thing. Nervous conditions, they're hard to ride, they get silly. It's called, hindgut acidosis. We can talk a bit about that later. The other thing is pain on hoof testers. In the mornings, if you go and test them with a hoof tester, sometimes they'll show pain around the toes, which is where they first get laminitic episodes, where the toes are got a lot more pressure on the toe, and the pedal bone can pull away from the lamina if it's not strong enough. And also, I'd recommend that if you really want to look at a horse's hoof and check it, is get an infrared thermometer, one of those infrared beam thermometers that we used to use for COVID. they're not very expensive. You just early in the morning, you test the hoof temperature in the front feet. If it's above 40 degrees centigrade, you've got to think the normal body temperature is 38 to 39 or at the maximum. So if it's above 39 to 40, you've got a problem in the feet, and you can scan the legs and scan the back feet and just see what the temperature difference is. So that's a really good early sign. If you've got heat in the feet, what we call heat in the feet because of increased diversion of blood flow, that's another sign of laminitis. And then, as I said before, now the other thing that we see sometimes in racehorses, and I used to see a bit of this in practice, they get kicked and get injured, and they get what we call supporting limb laminitis. That means that when they've got a really sore leg on one side, they'll take the weight off that, and they'll put it all on the good leg adjacent to it. So if it's the left, right hand, or the offside front leg, they'll put a lot more weight on the near side front leg. And that can cause a lot of damage, because a guy called Dr. O'Grady in USA found that if you only got 9 minutes it takes, if you got unrelated, what we call constant weight loading on a good leg, it's no problems with it. It's the other leg that's got the problem. It's got bow tendon, it's got a cracked pedal bone, it's got a fracture in the pedal bone, and they put all weight on the good leg because they can't. It's too painful to put on the bad leg. They'll put so much pressure on a good leg that they'll actually cause laminitis within 9 minutes. So, I've seen a few of these. Usually it's a kick by another horse, or even something like, a horse that's got a damage to the hoof, he's got some sort of tear in it, a low-grade foot infection, that sort of thing, where he's got so much pain in his hoof, he doesn't want to put weight on that hoof, so they put it on the other leg, and I've seen it in both the front and the back legs. I had a horse once that was in practice, got kicked in the hock by another horse in the stable, and it was going past, and it got really swollen up. And that horse died within 3 days from acute laminitis. Its pedal bone shattered, and the foot wall started, the foot capsule separated from the pedal bone, and you couldn't do anything about it. The other thing, of course, is if you've got laminitic ponies and you're giving laminitic horses, you get a lot of cortisone. It's never been shown to be a direct cause of laminitis in horses, and that's so you've just got to be careful about giving cortisone as an anti-inflammatory to horses like that, because that's more dangerous. You should be giving something like phenylbutazone, which is not the same type of reaction as cortisone, which increases the risk of it. So basically, there are some early signs, and the astute trainers. But I'd go to stables and they wouldn't even know they've got. And I'd say, how long have you had this horse? In 6 weeks? Because I'd see the bands on the rings on the coronary band, below the coronary band, and the horse has got poo and really sour droppings and really excitable and shuffling around the stable. Oh, how do you know? I said, I can see by its feet. It's got laminitis. And, as we said, Linford et al. In 1986 showed it. That was not an uncommon problem in 46% of racehorses early in training.
So they're definitely early sign, I guess, for people to notice those.
The signs that are there, but people don't worry about it, Okay.
Sure. And which 3 nutritional factors tends to contribute, the most to laminitis development in racehorses training, especially on synthetic surfaces?
Well, on really good surfaces, that's sometimes hard to, in sort of anti-concussion, softer surfaces, that's hard to see because they don't get so much concussion, and therefore if they get a lot of concussion and hard concussion on dry surfaces or ill-prepared, even synthetic surfaces that are not maintained properly, well, then you could get more concussion. And sometimes they're just as bad as having no synthetic surface in some cases when they don't maintain them properly, water them and re-wax them and all those sort of things. You might have to do some of the different types of surfaces are different. Some need re-waxing, some need more maintenance and water. So basically if it's a well-maintained synthetic surface, well, you shouldn't see too much problem in the early training, but providing has got a lot of grain in it in the diet quickly. And so the other factors, I think, is a lack of regular hoof maintenance and nutrients, particularly in the diet, biotin, which is so important, and biotin, calcium, trace minerals like copper, zinc, and manganese, and that's very important, and good quality protein in the diet. Some people, don't feed enough good quality protein. They've got protein in the diet, the total crude protein's above the requirements, but the protein is very poor quality. It hasn't got enough methionine in it, lysine, other things, amino acids to help the hoof grow, because keratin is a protein and it needs the basic fuel or basic raw materials to actually grow strong and keep and maintain itself. So that's where the problem we see sometimes in stables. And people say, "Oh, we add a biotin supplement to the feed." Well, that's a bit of a waste of time if it's a powdered biotin supplement, just a biotin by itself. It's unprotected, uncoated. It just goes to the feed, and as soon as it gets in there, it starts reacting with copper, zinc, manganese, and iron, particularly, which are reducing agents, and it can damage the biotin. It's very effective. Even in a mixed feed, like a sweet feed or a processed feed, heat processed feed, the biotin. Sometimes people add all the trace minerals and vitamins before they actually heat treat it with extrusion or micronization, and the heat damages it very quickly. And most of those feeds have got about 1 month of stability in the biotin, particularly, or other trace mineral, other vitamins, vitamin E and vitamin A, because the heat is damaging to them, and they've got about 1 month before they start deteriorating down, and it's not as effective. Now I think you've got to get a good quality hoof. We have one called Reboot Hoof, which is very popular in the GCC. It's starting to get more popular because it's got 3 different pellets. It's got a calcium pellets for the hoof hardness and the bonding lamellae inside the hoof when it gets laminitis. Also, it's got protected biotin in a coated biotin form in its own pellet with coated vitamin C, very high quality. Stability is 2 years. And it's got good quality protein in it, plus it's slightly acidified in one single pellet, so it's a 3-pellet mix. And the trace minerals in a totally different pellet, so they can't touch the biotin or have anything to do damaging biotin. But in a feed mix, you've got everything all together, and some of it's not protected. So then you've got a high risk. So those things I see quite often. People say, "Oh, we use a foot supplement," but it's not really the best thing as far as quality goes, in the way it's designed to be formulated to be stable and more active than having just a general foot supplement with biotin in it, which is, very unstable.
And how do you, sorry?
Okay.
No, I was just about to ask, how do you tend to support hoof recovery and, new growth once a horse has suffered a laminitis, I guess?
Well, it's a lot of different things. I mean, there's internal aids, and that's nutritional normally. That's what I said before with the correct biotin and stabilized biotin, calcium, zinc, copper, manganese, all those sort of things that are required for keratin production, which is the protein that hair and hooves are made of. So those sort of things help a lot. So getting a really stabilized form of biotin, as I said, in something like the Reboot Hoof that we manufacture, we do all the research on it, and the results have been very good in the field, in the trials we did, really high quality and better hoof quality within 2 to 6 weeks or so. People see it straight away. And then farriers notice that the horse's hooves are harder, so it's obviously in producing better quality keratin in the food. But also, there's other ways you can do it, not only nutritional ways, but also things like increase with lasers. You can use lasers, special lasers that increase blood flow. And I use myself over the last 20 or 30 years, I've used magnetic bell boots. Now, these are bell boots that go around the hoof, but they've got a magnetic field in them, about 2,500 to 3,000 Gauss flux in the boot, in the little magnets around, and you put them on, and they hang above the coronary band and around the hoof, and it increases the blood flow in the hoof, and you find that helps to improve the hoof growth and the quality of the hooves as well. But you only leave them on at night. I don't like them on 24/7. And even with tendon boots and that with magnets in it, you should never leave them on more than 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And night's the easiest because you're in the stable, not running around or doing anything. So I find that have been very good as well. And there's external aids, of course. Once you work the horse every day, bring it back and hose its legs down, cool its legs down. Now, ice boots are perfect because ice packs on a horse's leg, just a small little ice pack's a waste of time on the leg or the hooves. In fact, we often use for other horses like ponies, we actually get a bag of ice, like little discs of ice from an ice making machine, and tie the bag of ice around the front of the hoof with some vet wrap or tape, and let it hang down, and then punch a hole in the bottom so as the ice melts, the water runs out. So eventually it's not so heavy, and that is really good at keeping the hoof cold. But a really good quality ice boot is excellent because the horse's hoof can put in there, put the whole leg in, and it'll help the hooves as well. So I find that's very important to help the recovery as well, and help to reduce the inflammation, which is one of the big problems we've got. And of course, maybe a judicious use of phenylbutazone and things like that to try to reduce the inflammation. But you don't want to give too much of it for too long, obviously, because it's quite toxic. It's got it binds the blood for up to a week in the plasma protein, so it has an ongoing effect for some time. But once you get the dose loading, what we call a dose loading up, you can reduce the dose to a minimum without any side effects like liver damage or anything like that. The other thing is rocker shoes. They're quite good. Years ago we used to have heart bar shoes, and people had all these fancy shoes for laminitic ponies and laminitic racehorses, heart bars pressing underneath the foot to try to stop the pedal rotation. They actually sometimes cause more damage to the sole than they actually do benefit. And I think rocker shoes are better, the newer type of rocker shoes, because what happens with rocker shoes, they have a pivot, and the horse can stand there and become more comfortable, stand there and get the right angle on his hoof to make him more comfortable. So they're quite happy standing there. Otherwise, they've got to stand on the heels all the time, and that can cause a lot of problem, particularly if they've got low heels. And then maintain and trim the hooves so you've got high heels and less toe, and try to stop the flaring. Now, when you get a really severe laminitic episode in a racehorse in training, you get flaring of the actual outside of the hoof wall to the toe, so you get a flared foot. And I saw this over years ago where horses were overseas in a big racing stable. They ran out of hay, and they didn't have anything to give them. They couldn't get the hay in quick enough, they had to import it. So they gave them just pure corn. Now that's deadly, 5 kilos of corn a day. And if you ever want to cause laminitis in a horse, give it corn, gruel corn. That was the old model for creating laminitis, but it's banned obviously because it's inhumane. But these people didn't know, and they fed corn, and all the hooves started getting laminitis and very flared, and some of the hoof capsule came off the actual pedal bone in some horses. So it was really bad. So you just got to be very careful about. And that we've had a couple of racehorses, not very common in racing stables because people are very diligent. But horses get out of the stable and break into the feed room at night and eat all the corn. They don't eat the hay, or the roughies eat all the grain, which is not okay.
Fair enough. And once proper care has been provided, and I guess nutritional intervention as well, how long does it take to get a racehorse back on track? To competitive training.
That's a very good point, because it depends on how bad it is. Now, how bad is laminitis? I mean, very early laminitis, a bit of sore feet syndrome, and you cut the grain back, and you stop any progression of laminitis going on, and pedal bone rotation, all that sort of thing that happens when you get torn lamina and weak lamina because of inflammation. 2 to 3 weeks of careful management and cutting the feed back and giving it a hoof supplement, you should get a result in 3 to 4 weeks, up to 6 weeks or so, that sort of thing. But that means you've got to really monitor them, and I'd be looking at x-rays and maybe MRIs on the hoof to see if there's any improvement, and get monitored every couple of weeks to just see what's happening inside the hoof in case there's anything that's got a pedal rotation less than 5% is not it's laminitis, but it's not sort of to the stage of being severe as far as you can overcome it fairly quickly. But it depends on the actual horse. If it's a horse that's got very thin hoof wall and very thin soles, you might have to give it longer. Or horses had more symptoms of laminitis, as we said before on the thing, like really proppy and sore feet syndrome, and it's quite severe, well, then you've got to give it longer. If it's a more severe case, like the horse really gets quite severe and it's really proppy, and particularly in horses that have had, if they do get over having supporting limb laminitis, one foot's really overloaded, it gets laminitis from that within nine minutes, well, then you've got to be really long time because the lamina are torn. So if it's any more than 5% rotation in the pedal bone as it gets pulled down with a weakening of lamina and tearing on them, it could take anything up to 3 to 4 months or longer. It depends on the horse, and a lot of management on it. Cooling the feet all the time, managing it like that, the supplements of the reboot hoof and biotin and all those sort of things. They all help, but it really needs monitoring with X-rays or MRIs and just see what's happening inside the hoof every now and again, every 3 weeks or so, and just keeping the horse confined. And just trying to manage it that way. But if it's really a severe case and you don't pick it up early enough, well, then you've got a longer time of recovery. We normally say for, other equestrian type horses, at least 2 to 3 months, at least minimum. But they don't have the force on their feet as what racehorses do. So, they don't have 5,000 kilos of weight when they're galloping around a corner, and they might have 2,000 jumping, but sort of jumping horses and that sort of, even endurance horses, they have a problem with, a lot of the amount of stress on their legs and the amount of weight they're doing. So that can be increased, that sort of thing. And racehorses, probably the pinnacle is the amount of force on their front feet, particularly, which are the ones who've got more weight on them anyway.
It is a lot of resting, I guess. And as you mentioned, it can last 3 weeks to 3 months plus.
Well, I think you've got to monitor
depending on this.
Get your vet out. You have a veterinarian monitor it all the time with, maybe we said before, taking hoof temperatures, but that's really the early start of laminitis, and it gives you an indication. We said right from the start, that infrared thermometer, that's very good because you're actually zeroing in on the feet, just like we did on people's foreheads when they had COVID. That was an easy way to find out whether they had a temperature. But getting on the feet and that. Now, feet when they work, when a horse is galloping on a track, and of course that's another thing that adds to the heat in the feet is the surface of the actual track surface. So if it's very hot, you're going to get a hotter foot. But normally feet go from about 42 to 43 degrees centigrade during exercise, and they stay like that because once they're moving, it's the air going past. And now if the ambient temperature is high anyway in the GCC, the ambient temperature in the air around it is very high. Well, obviously there's not too much heat loss in the air, and they don't lose heat very much, so they can actually get hotter. Because when they're moving and working on the track, there's a lot of friction and moving slippage of the feet, and they actually heat themselves up a lot. The same as tendons, they get really quite hot. And you can damage tendons quite quickly by not cooling them down quickly after work. And then if they get above 47 degrees centigrade, the collagen fibers start to be damaged and the tendons get very weak and they can tear after that. So I think in the hooves, if you've got a hot surface, you're running on a hot sand surface or hot racetrack surface, obviously doing it early in the morning as possible is important. But cooling those feet down as soon as you finish off the track. Now, one way is ice packing, I said before. Swimming the horse in a swimming pool straight away, I used to work in a big racing stable, and every horse that came back from the track would just walk back from the track for the last 200 or 300 meters and go straight to the swimming pool for one lap only. And that cooled them down very quickly. And, that was just very good. The water wasn't that hot, it wasn't hot water, obviously, but it was cooling water, and that's a big volume of water, and the hooves cool down very quickly. And I think that's a big way of reducing the risk of further damage. So it all helps to reduce the temperature in the hooves, which naturally heat up anyway, and once they stop working, the air going past the hooves is not moving past the hooves anymore, so the hooves can't lose their heat into the air. So in hot environments, it's even worse because they can't. So cooling down immediately with hosing down, cold water hosing for 5 minutes can help. Now, one little tip I always recommend for people if they're doing a lot of swimming in a horse, swimming's hard to do it, but for cold water hosing, which some people have, is to wrap the horse's hoof in kitchen film. That thin kitchen film, the plastic film you use in the kitchen to put over food, and you just wrap the hoof in that so they don't get wet. Otherwise, you'll end up with a lot of problems with wet hooves and, loss of shoes and soft hooves and thin and soft soles. So wrapping them in something like that will stop the water getting in, especially if you're just hosing them down. Some people put them in a plastic bag and hose that, but it's got to be right against the hoof. It can't be sort of have too much air between it. So I find we call it glad wrap here, but kitchen film is very good to put 2 or 3 layers on it, and it'll stop the feet getting so wet, and that helps them recover.
Excellent. Which brings me to my next question. How do GCC condition, like, extreme heat, high starch feeding practices, how do that increase laminitis risk compared to, let's say, other regions in the world?
Well, I think you've got a double whammy there. You've got the heat, which is one thing, which is a problem. And you've probably got horses that, are very high performing horses as well. People, they've got really good horses, got some of the best horses in the world, and they do run faster and, they do it every day. And you've got the track surfaces. If it's a good track surface, it's good. That helps reduce the concussion on the track surface, of course. And the problem is you don't have any relief from the heat, because even in November on nowadays that the race is starting soon again, and that horse has been in training for a month and a half or so already, but you've got to manage it. So basically is that it's mainly the feeding track practices. The high starch is one of the main causes of it, I think, initially, anyway, particularly in the first 4 to 6 weeks. So that's got to really, and I limit the starch increase to 500 grams a day. They start on half a kilo a day, and then they increase it every 5 days up till they get to the level. The horse is not in early work. It's not going to be doing too much fast work. It's just going to be getting a little bit fitter and starting to get some exercise, what we call long distance travel, LSD training. That's sort of long distance work, and they don't need a lot of energy, but just increasing it slowly rather than suddenly increasing it to 4 kilos. And as soon as it comes into the stable, it's bad news, because it does increase the risk of that. And not only does it worry the feet and cause problems in the feet, but the horse has got diarrhea, it's losing fluid, and that's not one thing you don't want in the GCC, dehydration and loss of fluid. And also they get very nervous, young horses. I've had young horses that's the last thing you want for a young 2-year-old or 3-year-old. Gets very nervous because hindgut acidosis, which is the result of too much grain feeding, the acid de-lactic acid builds up, causes problems with the diarrhea and irritation of the gut wall. It goes to the feet and causes blood flow problems in the feet and causes laminitis, but it also has a problem on their brain, so that they get really nervy. And I've seen that a lot of times over the years, and sort of thought, it is the grain, too much energy, but they found now that it's actually the grain that's causing it in a lot of cases. So the worst combination you got is a young horse with an inexperienced rider. Now, most of the riders in the GCC are very experienced riders compared with what we have here even. But, if you've got a young experienced rider, you've got a young, excitable sort of nervy sort of horse, you've got a real big risk of danger to not only the horse, but to the rider. And that's a big problem, in if you get them too early and don't manage it properly. Okay, so hot track surfaces, that sort of thing. So basically, I think you've got those extra things, the heat and the sort of changing the feed around a bit more, high starch diets, all those sort of add to it in GCC, whereas over here we don't get so much heat but we still have the problem with the young 2-year-olds getting really excitable and getting hindgut acidosis because of too much grain.
And what would be the most effective prevention protocol that you would recommend for yards with horses, showing those kind of early warning signs?
Yeah, that's a good point. I said in the last answer that basically limit the grain increase over 500 grams a day for every 4 to 5 days or longer, sometimes longer. Now, you don't need it early in training. Make sure they've got adequate roughage. That's another thing we have in Australia, and I don't think it happens as much as in the GCC because people need more roughage. But the problem is when I went to ADX, I looked at a lot of lucerne alfalfa hay, and it's got no leaves on it. It's just stalks, and that's not very good type of roughage for amino acids and protein. You need that sort of thing, but you need roughage for fiber. And it's got too much protein. We talked about, I think the last talk we had was too much protein in the diet will actually increase the amount of heat in the hindgut, and that can cause, sweat loss and exhaustion as well. So that sort of thing. The other thing is make sure the horse is supplemented with a hindgut probiotic, and we have a product called Fabi, which has got 3 Pacific hindgut probiotics in it, including a problem that stops the acid building up and actually metabolize the acid. Plus, it's got live yeast, coated, high quality, very stable live yeast in it, which a lot of people don't use live yeast. They just use ordinary, dead yeast or poor quality. And it's got, mycotoxin binders, plus it's got other prebiotics, very high quality fibers in it. So that really does make a big difference. Now, in Australia, we're recommending, and we've had some really good results in horses coming into work. We know the trainers, particularly that start their grain too quickly. We found if they start about 7 days before they bring the horse into work with the Fabi, they'll have no changeover because it takes a horse naturally up to a month to adapt to high grain. The microbiota, the bacteria, or the microbes in the hindgut take about a month to adapt to high grain starch. So if you start them precondition before you start training, but certainly start it when you bring them into work rather than wait till you get the problem, then you've got a big thing. And we find that Fabi works very well on that sort of thing. It's really high quality horse specific probiotics. Most of the people use cattle probiotics here, and it really does make a big difference to horses. Okay, and of course use a high quality hoof supplement we talked about before with good quality coated biotin, and that also helps. So those sort of 4 or 5 little things will help a lot to help reduce the risk of it.
Excellent. Well, that was the last question, John. Thank you so much.
Okay. No worries. Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Excellent. Great answers. I really enjoyed chatting with you today.
Thank you very much.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.